In this session, we're going to look at virtualizing Office 2010 with App v4.6, the new Service Pack 1, which features a brand new sequencer that's a lot easier to use, a lot more intuitive. So the first thing we need to do when we actually want to virtualize Office is there's actually a special deployment kit for Office 2010 that you use when you want to virtualize it with App V. And it basically enables the virtualized Office to have full integration with the operating system. So search, print to OneNote, all of that functionality. So the first thing we're actually going to do is set up our sequencer machine ready. Now, the SP1 sequencer will actually do this stuff for you. Again, it does a lot of the best practices, dummy ODBC connections, dummy printers. But I'm just going to go in advance and stop things like Windows Update, Windows Defender, any malware protection. And again, the sequencer is going to do it for us anyway. Well, it won't do Defender or antivirus. It will stop Windows Update, but it's not going to stop anything security related. But what it would do is pop up a dialog basically letting you know, hey, you've got Defender running, this is not best practices. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to install the Office deployment kit for App V. And it's a simple one-line command. And so this is something I have to run on the sequencer machine. So the sequencer machine is where I'm actually creating that virtualized version of Office. And then I would actually run it on all of the client machines that are actually running that virtualized Office package as well. Now, in my example here, I'm using a volume license MAC key, a multiple use authentication key. You could also use like a KMS or a volume activation sort of management tool interface. There's different switches, and they're all actually described in the sequencing guidance for Office 2010 that's available on the Microsoft site. I'll actually show it to you at the end of the video. So I've installed that. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually launch the sequencer. And again, this is my sequencing machine. It's a clean OS on it. Nothing installed, because I obviously want it to be as clean as possible to make sure there's no interference with things it would install. I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual application package in this process. Then there are two options. We can create a package manually or using an accelerator. I'm going to do it manual first. Notice there's no warnings because I stopped Defender already. I'm creating a standard application. It's not a plugin. It's not some middleware component. I select the installer for this package. And this whole process from start to finish in this environment takes about an hour. I cut some bits out of the recording. I fast forward some bits. I'm entering a name for the virtual application. And notice it's going to do to the Q drive automatically. So it's doing some quick checks. It's going to launch that installer for Office. Now, what I've done is I've basically now, you can see the installation starting. This is the volume license version of Office, which again is a requirement to actually virtualize. Now what I don't want to do here, I want nothing installed on first use, because obviously we're virtualizing it. We don't want it trying to install anything from the installation media. So we either make it available or we don't make it available, but we don't do install on first use. All I'm doing in this manual one is I want Excel, OneNote, PowerPoint, and Word. I'm actually cutting out everything else. I just want to capture those few things. Just going through and making a few selections. Don't need the French or Spanish. But again, you need to make decisions based on what you're going to use in your organization. This is just really just an example. The important thing I do have to make sure I change is the file location. When I virtualize a package, I virtualize to that Q drive. Now, it doesn't have to be Q, it's whatever you've configured it, but it does have to be consistent in your app-v deployment. And this is something you already would have done as part of your app-v sort of architecture and planning, but just make sure you do change it to that app-v drive, which by default is Q. And you would have noticed at the start, it even had that little balloon pop-up that actually said, hey, make sure you deploy to Q. Now, rather than sit and wait for a general install process, you'll see the time in the right-hand corner is going to go a bit faster than normal. I'm actually skipping bits and fast-forwarding the timeline so we don't just have to sit here watching paint dry. So it's going through, and again, during this install process, what the sequence is doing is watching what it's doing. What files is it writing to the file system, to the Q drive, and to see, it still captures if it writes to program files, Windows, registry changes, COM objects, user mode services, fonts. All of that is being captured and being made part of that sequence. You notice it's also applying updates. So what I've actually got in my install media for the Office Professional Plus is, if you go to the root of your Office install location, there's an updates folder. You can just go to the Microsoft catalog, download the updates, expand them out and put them in that root folder, and they will all get automatically applied during the installation of Office. So that's what you're seeing there. That's why I have updates being applied. I put them in the updates folder. So that's going to go through, complete the update application, and Office is now installed into my sequencing environment. So it's now in those abstraction, the virtual file system, virtual registry. So the next thing I actually do now is to sort of go through and configure the software. Now, in the pre-SP1 version of the sequencer, and if you've used the pre-SP1, it does look very different. But in the pre-SP1 version, one of the things we actually had to do was go and run each program before we did something called the feature block 1 calculation. So if you was going to do any other updates or changes right now, you would make those changes, and then once you finish. So you notice here, this is what I used to have to do. I'm only going to do it for really one of the programs. You would browse to the file and you would sort of run WinWord and PowerPoint. You'd run each program. And the reason you would run it outside of sort of the sequencer is some programs do initial setup the first time they're run. So we would run it once or twice to get through that initial configuration, enter your name, maybe activation, these sort of setup details. We don't need to do that anymore. So I did it here just to show this is what we used to do. But actually what we do now is we say I'm finished installing, I've made a change, applying updates, done all the changes I actually need. Now it actually gives me a configure software option. So it's going through, it's collecting the changes that were made, again, abstracting it from the operating system, which is the whole point of application virtualization. It lets me run the application on the OS without making changes to that underlying OS, no changes to the C drive, to program file, to the registry. The app runs inside its own virtual bubble. So the application thinks it's running on the OS natively, but actually all its file system, registry, COM, user services, fonts is all wrapped inside that virtual environment, not changing the underlying OS, and so avoiding any conflicts with other applications because they're each in their own little virtual environment. Now it's showing me, hey, these are all the applications that I found during that installation process. Now I can select them and run them. So when I run each of them, that's when I can do those initial configuration tasks, which is why I don't need to sort of run them outside of the sequencer anymore like I used to have to do. So I select each app, I run it, I can make any configuration, any customizations that I need. But again, I did it already outside of that, but you just run them through. And I'm just going to run through the 4 main ones. I mean, really, all I care about publishing in my little lab environment, which is what I'm doing this for, is PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and OneNote. So I'm going to click Next. Again, it's going for a quick review, checking what's changed. And the amount of time it takes is really going to depend on obviously what you're installing. So I'm installing Office. I mean, that's a big package, but also the system you're performing this sequencing on. I mean, I'm doing it on a virtual machine, on a server that's got a lot going on. It's my home lab. At the end, it shows you this review, any issues that may have been found. It found a printer driver, probably related to OneNote. So this one you can stop. I don't want to do that. I want to customize it. I want to customize the shortcuts, and I want to prepare it for streaming. And because that's key. I want this to be able to stream in my environment, which means the application doesn't have to be deployed before a user can run it. It will actually pull down the information over the network and make it available. This is where I can remove shortcuts and things that it thought were maybe part of the application. The sequence is basically looking at the system. And if you run Notepad or Explorer, it may think that's part of it. So you can go in and remove the components you don't want to actually be part of your virtualized application. So I'm just going in and tidying it up a little bit. So now what it's going to do, this is the important part. These are the programs that I've left. And what this is going to do is, instead of just capturing, hey, these are the changes to the file system, the registry, and all those other areas I talked about, the object management, now it lets me run them. Now the reason we want to run it is, rather than when I launch the application for the first time as a user, having to wait for it to pull down all of the virtualized app before it starts, what this does is it's monitoring. So what parts of those virtualized file system does it really need to access to open the initial application? So it was watching what was needed just then to open that. I'm going to do that for each application. All of those parts that were actually needed to open the application, it puts at the start of the streaming file. It's something called feature block 1. And that's what it's basically ascertained is required to open up the application. And so when I'm as a user and I'm using streaming to give me the applications, instead of it actually sending the entire virtualized file system, the entire stream, it's just going to send me feature block 1 initially. And at that point, my application will open. Then in the background, it's going to send me the rest of the feature block. So then if I'm offline or I want to access the additional features, they're there, but it doesn't slow me down from initially launching the application. Now I can state what platforms this is for. Obviously, if I'm sequencing on Windows 7 32-bit, normally that's going to be okay for Windows 7 64-bit and Windows Server R2, but it wouldn't necessarily be okay for a lower operating system like Vista, probably definitely not XP. I can enter a quick comment and then save it. And what you're going to notice now is the time's going to leap forward like 40 minutes. What I did is I forgot to unpause the recording, and I made one of the changes, but I wanted you to see what was changed. So basically, afterwards I went back and reopened up the package and made the change again. So you can actually see what I did, and I inserted it into the timeline. So I didn't want you to miss any of the configuration steps. But that's why you're going to see the time's going to jump forward. And then once I finish that step, you actually can see the time jump back again. Then I realized, oh, I paused the recording. Praise be for editing. So now it's actually seen what was opening and the streaming. It's actually now actually creating that final SFT file, the streamed version of the application, which has got the feature block 1 and the feature block 2 within it. So now as the time's jumped forward, basically I opened up the application and I said, modify, open it up for editing. I selected that saved project I created, so the Office 2010, and we only made 3 changes to it. So it's important that into the environment. I'm changing the server name, and I use the RTSP protocol instead of RTSPS, i.e. SSL. And for the Microsoft Office 14, I want to make sure, and it's by default anyway, merge with local registry on the machine rather than overwriting it. Also, I do this for every single OSD. In the virtual environment policies, make sure local interaction allowed is set to true. And I do that for each of them, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and Save. That's it. They're the only changes I made, but I did forget to record that. So as the time's jumped back, so now I'm actually going through and I'm actually going to copy that virtualized application up to my AppV server. So this machine is not part of the domain. Again, my sequencing machine, I mean, ideally it's not even connected to the network. I want nothing that can interfere while I'm doing this. So now I'm just going to copy my package up to network. And again, magic of editing, it's done. I'm now going to jump over to my AppV server. So I've already got Office 2007 virtualized on this. If I now actually go and look in the content folder, which is where I store my virtualized apps, I've now got that Office 2010. I'm going to create a new group called Office 2010 where I'm going to store those applications. And then I'm going to import in that project file. Before I actually do that, I'm just going to double check to make sure the OSD files, which really describe where it's going to pull down the SFT file, has got the right server name and location it does. So I'm good to go. I'm just going to import it in. I can select an application license group where I want shortcuts, who's allowed to access this. So I'm just making it available to everyone, i.e. domain users. It's showing me I've got conflicts on certain file type extensions because I've also virtualized Office 2007. So obviously that has a lot of the same association. So what I would really at this point need to do is either disable the Office 2007 or manually set. So this is a client, AppV client, and right now this AppV client only has Office 2007. All I'm going in and doing a refresh. So I'm simulating a logon, making it actually go and talk to the AppV server. On this machine, I've already installed that Office 2010 deployment kit that I need for AppV. So you actually see it's already on there. But if you hadn't, I need to install that on all my clients. And you can push that out with group policy. So now they're all there. But notice the package status is 0. None of it's actually cached locally on this machine. So now I'm going to see if it's shown up the shortcuts. Yep, they're there. Watch the right hand corner. I'm going to launch it for the first time. This is pulling down that feature block 1 over the network. So remember, that's just enough for the package to open the initial application and get you doing stuff, get you working. Just doing a quick few initial sort of setup tasks, checking. And notice all it's pulled down is 7% of that entire package so far. But it's actually going to open because it's pulled most of what it needs. So now PowerPoint opens. There's no licensing or activation because I'm using that the Office 2010 deployment kit for the AppV. So I can now actually start working and make changes to this. Even though it's not even finished pulling down all of the content yet, I can still start using it. If I go back and refresh, I'm at 16%. So it's just streaming it down, pulling it down in the background. And it's just gonna chug away in the background until it's all cached down. And you can actually go and see where it pulls that down to. It's a shared cache used by all of the users on the machine. And it stores it in here. That's the overall cache file for everyone on this box. And again, we can see all the file type associations. You can see on this box, I've got now the virtualized Office 2010, Office 2007, and Acrobat redirects. So that is virtualizing Office 2010. This is the knowledge base article, KB 983462. This goes through the step-by-step guidance on how to virtualize Office 2010, and that's what I followed to do this. If you're using things like Outlook and you want the mapping integration and SharePoint, there's an extra proxy command you need to run. But again, it lists the command in here. It also talks about entering the right product key in the Office 2010 deployment kit for AppV. So finally, I did that manual installation. Office 2010 also gives you a package accelerator. So I went in that to make some changes to the package. A package accelerator is also supplied. And what that does is, instead of me having to answer questions, when you use a package accelerator, essentially what it does, someone's already done that work for you. So what you do is you specify the package accelerator you're going to use. you point it to the source media, and it doesn't make you do all the same configurations and settings. It will actually spit out a virtualized version. Now, some of them have guidance. They have specific steps you have to follow. In fact, they all have guidance. They vary on how complex or simple it may be. It's a good idea to export out that guidance to a file somewhere, just so it's there for you to review. Now, Office 2010, as part of the package accelerator, it requires it runs through the install. You then just run a repair function, and then you run the streaming steps to actually create the feature block 1 and feature block 2. So the guidance gives you the step-by-step commands, everything you need to do. And what it will actually do is it's going to spit out a complete version of Office. So all of the Office applications will be created as part of that virtualized app. And again, this is just the sequence that comes with it. It talks about that proxy. You can see there, it talks you to run those commands. It tells you the commands to run to install the deployment kit for Office 2010 with AppV. It talks about running that repair function. So it just gives you that step-by-step guidance. It makes it very simple and easy to actually do. So you just need to remember you follow it very carefully. Now again, this is going to spit out a complete version. So I now did next. I'm actually selecting the install location for the Office 2010, the volume license. It's automatically going to select a name. Remember the old pre-SP1 of having to have an 8.3 name is gone. I give it a comment. Remember, if the package size was coming out over 4 gig, you'd want to make sure you use compression, but this isn't coming in that big. And then you click create, and that's it. And it's now actually going through, and it's actually going to spit out that virtualized app. At that point, we would run through the configure software. So we run a repair process is the next step that we actually perform. So I mean, it's simple things to do. I mean, it just takes a bit of time. Again, depending on the sequence of PC you're using is going to dictate how long this process takes. But this is something you're doing once. In the future, when you want to apply updates to this, you just open up Office or any other application in the sequencer and say open for update. It reads that virtualized app into the environment. You apply the patches and it saves the changes, and those changes get pushed out to all of your AppV clients in the environment the next time they launch it. And again, it only pulls down the changes to the virtualized stream, not the entire stream again. So it's loading in that virtualized app. Outside of this, I'm then going to kick off the repair functionality, and it's going to go through and, like I say, create that final virtualized app. I'm not going to, again, sit through the entire process, but that's essentially the process for virtualizing Office 2010 if you use the package accelerator. So you saw me do it manually, and if you looked at the time, that took me about an hour in total. If you use the package accelerator, it's fast as well. Again, you run that repair, you do the install, but the advantage is you don't have to do the manual configuration. You don't have to go in and edit, for example, checking the merge with local and any other the changes I made. But I mean, to be honest, the great thing now is that there is actually, it's fairly light amount of work. The sequence is a very, very powerful tool now. There isn't a huge amount of effort involved in sequencing most applications. So it's really come a long way since the early versions. And I hope this has been useful. I hope it really clears up that I spoke to a number of customers and clients recently, and they had this concern that AppV is very hard to use. It's very hard to create virtualized apps, and Office 2010 can't be sequenced. Well, you saw then, if you looked at the timing, from the time I started to the time I deployed Office 2010 to a client, it was about an hour. Like I say, there may be considerations, customizations for your company. I'm not saying it will take you an hour, but the actual process of sequencing Office is not a complex process. Hope that was useful. I really appreciate your time.